Welcome aboard Pink Monorail. I'm your pilot, Michelle Valladolid, and next to me is my co-pilot, Noe Valladolid.
Hey everybody.
Last time on Pink Monorail's Manufacturing the Magic series, we talked about how a berry farm became a world-class theme park. On this episode, we're going to take a step back and look at the mechanics of magic, or the origins and how do they do it of some popular theme park attractions. The first amusement ride written about is the Up and Downs. A large vertical wheel had one, then later 2 or 3 chairs loosely fastened to its flat side. On the other side was sometimes a crank, sometimes not, and the wheel had to be spun by hand. People sat in the chairs and went up and down. Hence the name.
So we're talking ancient history, and in case people are having difficulty imagining these types of rides, think of the reflectors on the side of a bicycle. So you would replace a reflector with a seat so that they would, as they spun, the chair would stay vertical or horizontal so the person didn't fall over.
Right.
And they'd be able to complete this circuit on the wheel.
Exactly. In Turkey, this grew to a crosshatch design of poles, holding 8 chairs that hung from the poles. Pleasure wheels may have come from Bulgaria. Passengers rode in chairs suspended in wooden rings, turned by several strong men. In May of 1620, Peter Mundy, a famous traveler, wrote, "Like a crane wheel, all custom house key, and turned in that manner, whereon children sit on little seats hung round about in several parts thereof, and though it turn right up and down, and that the children are sometimes on the upper part of the wheel, and sometimes on the lower, yet they always sit upright." Lots of extra T's and P's and E's in that. In 1615, traveler Pietro della Valle attended a Ramadan festival in Constantinople. He says, "I was delighted to find myself swept upwards and downwards at such speed, but the wheel turned round so rapidly that a Greek who was sitting near me couldn't bear it any longer and shouted out, 'Soni, Soni!' or 'Enough, enough!'" French traveler with an Italian name, Antonio Manguino, introduced the pleasure wheel in America in 1848 at a fair in Walton Spring, Georgia.
Now, by this point, were they still like the ups and downs, or were we starting to see them designed more like the more traditional Ferris wheel that we're used to?
They were on sticks.
They were on sticks?
They were on sticks.
Huh.
That went around. Instead of a wheel on the axis, there were long sticks on the axis that held the seats.
And the seats were there. Oh boy.
In 1892, William Summers devised 3 50-foot wheels at Asbury Park and Atlantic City in New Jersey and at Coney Island in New York. He called it a roundabout and filed a patent on it in 1893. It sat 2 people per car and looked very much like a Ferris wheel as we know it today. Summers sued Ferris, but lost. George Washington Gale Ferris rode the Summers wheel while designing the Ferris wheel, but the judge ruled that while Ferris was inspired by the roundabout, the 2 wheels were different enough that there was no copyright infringement. The pleasure wheel was 50 cents to ride, which is almost $17 today. The Ferris wheel, as I said, designed by George Washington Gale Ferris, was sketched out on a napkin by White City designer Daniel Burnham. The people who ran the world's Columbian Exposition wanted to one-up the Eiffel Tower, and Ferris offered something just as majestic in steel, but that moved. If you go to 1893chicago00.com, you can ride a virtual version of the original Ferris wheel. Nearly 1.5 million tickets were sold, slightly more than the population of Chicago itself. It ran for the rest of the fair, then was moved to Lincoln Park, then sold and moved to the 1904 St. Louis Exposition, then destroyed with dynamite.
Now, just so people get a sense of it, of how massive this Ferris wheel was.
I'm going to go ahead and get into that.
Oh, okay. I was going to say, based on the stories you told me, it's like, oh, this is much bigger than the little carnival ones you see on the street.
Absolutely. A near replica of it stands in Vienna, Austria, and you can dine in the cars. Their website is wienerreiserad.com. WienerReisenrad.com, and that was built in 1897. But back to the original wheel. When they demolished the wheel, they were able to haul away all of the steel for reuse except the axle, the longest hollow forging at the time. It was made by Bethlehem Steel in Pittsburgh. It was longer than a modern school bus. This is backed up by OrangeBeanIndiana.com, of all places. 45 feet long, just under 45 tons. Spider gears, which held all of the legs that reached out, or the spokes of the wheel, were 27 tons. Dr. Sheldon Briner, a geophysicist specializing in magnetometers, which is like a metal detector but could detect things like mineral deposits, sunken ships, and snow-covered corpses. And it turns out Ferris wheel axles. In the late 90s, Washington University had led a search for remains of the Ferris wheel. Again, 45 feet long, 45 tons. Debris field is under what is now a golf course. They looked all over the golf course but couldn't find it.
Now, these 45 tons that you're talking about, those are the individual cars.
No, that's just the axle.
That was just the axle on this Ferris wheel?
That's just the axle. Everything else got hauled away and reused.
Oh my gosh.
Dr. Briner helped found a company called Geometrics with his cesium magnetometer, which cost $35,000 at the time. The company let him borrow it for 2 days, then they had to use it to locate a sunken ship in the Philippines. He reduced the search area to 4 spots, 2,000 square feet. He knew the length, 45 feet, and the width, 34 feet, and that it was buried horizontally. In the middle of the second day, he found it, buried under the intersection of Skinker and Wydown Boulevards, just off the golf course, 7 to 10 feet below the surface, with one end a foot or two deeper. He encouraged the city to dig it up, but died October 2019 at 82 without it happening. There are presently no plans to dig it up. The Ferris wheel had its own electrical plant 100 feet away from the wheel, and was 264 feet tall when finished. For comparison, the Pixar Pal-Around, previously Mickey's Fun Wheel and the Sun Wheel, is 160 feet tall, so it's 100 feet taller than the one at DCA.
Oh boy, that'll give you some vertigo.
So when it first opened, Jim and I got to go to the pre-opening night party
At DCA.
And they had that lobster in the little bucket of butter I told you about. Yeah. And we kept running into David Hasselhoff and accused him of stalking us. But Jim and I went in the purple car of the Ferris wheel. And from then on, I went on the red car.
These are the ones that slide back and forth to the inner hub and back all the way to the outside.
I believe Jim still has fingernail marks in his arm from that night.
Well, he was warned.
And he was trying to calm me down. He was saying, we're sitting on rocking chairs in front of a cabin in Vermont, and Alice is inside breaking things.
And nothing he said could calm you down.
Nothing he said could calm me down.
From that metal death trap suspended 100 feet above the ground.
160 feet above the ground. Yeah, that was not fun.
And that's why Jim doesn't take you on rides anymore.
And that's why Jim doesn't take me on rides anymore. The wheel ended up being about a quarter the size of the Eiffel Tower, but it moved. It weighed 2,079,884 pounds empty, and with a full load of 2,160 passengers. Now, let me say right here that 2,160 passengers could fit on the cars, but they only put about 60 people per car.
Just to be safe.
Mm-hmm. And so people would have room to move around.
Right.
It weighed about 2,382,244 pounds, or 1,191 tons. Even on a cloudy or smoky day, though Ferris wheel was very popular, if not for the view, then for the thrill of the ride itself. A few couples tried to get married on the Ferris wheel, but the company refused. The company being the world's Columbian Exposition company.
The expo organizers.
Exactly. 1,453,611 paid admissions plus 400 VIP free admissions equaled over $700,000 profit. $513,000 was retained by the fair, and the rest went to Ferris. It's said to be $400,000, but the math doesn't add up and equals $700,000 that way.
Right.
So somewhere the math is wonky.
Yeah, but it's still a considerable amount, and in today's dollar, that would be millions and millions in profit for this wheel.
Exactly. It left him a rich man till his death. The cars were 24 feet long as a city bus, 13 feet wide, and empty, weighed 26,000 pounds. Each car had fancy spinning chairs for 38 people. You could sit and spin 360 degrees to look all around you. 60 people fit in the car altogether, comfortably. 5 large plate glass windows, like those invented for London's Crystal Palace 50 years earlier, graced each car for easy viewing of the fairgrounds. There was a door at each end with a sturdy lock, fire equipment, and a uniformed attendant. Talk about a great summer job.
Mm-hmm.
If the original Ferris wheel were at DCA, you could probably see the ocean.
Wow.
Sadly, George Washington Gale Ferris died of tuberculosis at the age of 37. He never got to see what a success his wheel became. The tallest existing Ferris wheel is in Dubai, and it's 800 feet tall, still not quite as tall as the Eiffel Tower. The Vienna wheel I mentioned earlier, which burnt down in 1944, was rebuilt in 1945, along with several historic buildings. The new wheel went into regular operation in 1947, now had 15 wagons instead of the original 30 cars. Each wagon had 4 windows instead of the original 6. In 2002, 18 of the original lost cabins were returned. It was the star of the 2002 Panorama Exposition. The website says it is now bathed in gold and silver light. In 2016, 15 new true to the original 6-window wagons were added. It stopped turning during the height of the COVID pandemic, but went back into service in 2020. There are 4 carriages set aside for special dining trips for 2 people. Mm-hmm. The Table for 2 to 11 people, and Come Together for 6 to 15 people. It's roughly $100 per person for the table one. Mm-hmm. And that's the Ferris wheel.
Well, that's lovely. Now, so if you're into unique dining experiences, that would be a treat.
It's on my bucket list.
All right. Yet another thing to save up for. So before we continue, we'd like to leave a little space for our sponsors. Of course, we would appreciate if you patronized our sponsors, which help us pay the bills.
Yeah.
And we're back.
The carousel wasn't a thing with horses that spins at first. At first, the carousel was a fancy word for a tournament with sword fighting, jousting with javelins, and the rest of it. When it came time to practice, someone designed a device that spun in a circle with a couple of wooden horses, not fully designed horses, more like chairs, on the top side. This contraption was turned by a strong man or a beast of burden. Jousters used their javelins to try to spear a wooden hoop as they spun by. This wooden hoop later became a brass ring, familiar to those who ride carousels up until the 1950s. Some carousels and merry-go-rounds still do it. The ones at Disney don't. Mm-hmm. If you can grab the brass ring, you get a free ride.
Now, here's something that's actually a correction going back to the very first episode of this podcast series. So, when Shelly was describing which way it turned, I said, well, if they're using their lances, then it's got to go counterclockwise. And you said, yeah, I suppose. The thing is, that's not right. They actually would go clockwise, and the reasoning behind that is I was thinking, since most people are right-handed and their lance would be on their right hand, the easiest way to grab the hoop or the ring would be on the right side. But when you're riding on horseback, you're actually crossing over your shield, which is on your left, so the lance would be on the left side, which means the rings, or the carousel, the carousel would be rotating clockwise. So that's a correction if you were paying attention to the very first episode of the Pink Monorail podcast. I said, logically it would have been counterclockwise, but then thinking back on it, no, the lance went over, so it would be clockwise.
That's right. People soon saw the opportunity for entertainment and money-making with this device, which was named after the tournament, the carousel. Carousels have horses, no other animals. Merry-go-rounds have other animals like lions and zebras, like the one at Knott's Berry Farm, Bud Hurlbut's Densel merry-go-round. American carousels and merry-go-rounds turn counterclockwise. British ones go clockwise. As Noah told you. It's harder to get the brass ring that way, but easier to stab things with your javelin.
That's for sure. The
carousel tournaments got their name for Arabian carouselas, or little wars. In Arabia, this turned into a game where people rode on the contraption, tossing balls to each other, and I got that from bryantpark.org. As the carousel developed, the horses and even the details of the carousel became more ornate. By 1861, Thomas Bradshaw had found a way to make them steam-powered. The first steam-powered carousel appeared at the Pot Market in Bolton, England in 1861, and it's not that kind of pot, Noah.
I was thinking a kettle market.
There you go.
What kind of market were you thinking of? Just because we live in Long Beach doesn't mean every corner's a dispensary.
Just every other corner.
Yeah.
The oldest carousel in existence was built in 1780 and is in Hanau, Germany. Ladies rode in gondolas, flat carriages with seats. The one at Disneyland has wheelchair access disguised as a gondola. Men rode horses. Prince Wilhelm IX of Hessen-Kassel funded it in part by supplying Hessian soldiers to England, like in the movie Sleepy Hollow.
Oh.
It was rebuilt in 1882 and has 4 chariots, each with 2 horses and 2 pairs of spring-mounted horses. The mechanism beneath the carousel was an ingenious spoke and wheel pattern with a horse and man making it go. Unfortunately, the roof settled over time onto the spinning wheel, and it hasn't turned since 1932. Fortunately, a group of civic-minded people banded together to hire an engineer to figure out how to raise the roof and get the carousel safely operating again. The work is in progress as I speak. The National Carousel Association is part of this effort. You can read about it more on their site, carousels.org. The carousel itself has a website too, carouselwilhelmsbad.de, carousel-wilhelmsbad.de, like the Wilhelm scream.
Mm-hmm.
Carousels in their different forms are also called jumpers, horseabouts, gallopers, and flying horses. During the Industrial Revolution, the era of trolley parks and amusement parks and piers, skilled carousel carvers came from England, Germany, and other parts of Europe to come and design mammoth carousels that dwarfed those in Europe. Some designers close to my heart include Loof, whose grandson still operates Loof's Light-A-Line here in Long Beach, and Denzel, and I'll get to him later. But Light-A-Line here in Long Beach, the place is stuffed with Pike memorabilia, including several gorgeous horses. Charles I. D. Loof lived from 1852 to 1918 and built carousels out of Riverside, Rhode Island. He made about 40 carousels between 1876 and 1916, and about 10 of them are still operating. Wikipedia says, Loof carousels are known for their lavish decoration, including animals with real horsehair tails, elaborate gold and silver highlights, and sparkling mirrors and jewels. In California, there are Loof carousels in Seaport Village in San Diego, Children's Creativity Museum in San Francisco, and the Santa Cruz Loof Carousel in Santa Cruz at the Boardwalk. The other one is Gustav and William H. Denzel, who built carousels with 2 R's like at Disney World. The G.A. Denzel Carousel Company, aka G.A. Denzel Steam and Horsepower Carousel Builder. Gustav Denzel founded the company in 1867 in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, until 1928 when it became Philadelphia Toboggan Coasters. Gustav emigrated to the U.S. in 1860, having carved carousels for his father in Germany. He first opened a sensible cabinet-making shop on Germantown Avenue. He then built a miniature carousel to take around the country with him. This was common of carousel makers, and one of them is on display at Boardwalk Resort. So our friend was in charge of that, little carousel, and they were building the Boardwalk Resort.
And this is at Walt Disney World.
At Walt Disney World. And Jim and I were living in Florida with baby Alice at the time. And he asked for pictures of babies for the cherubs.
Mm-hmm.
So I got up one morning and Alice was not in her bed.
Mm-hmm.
I went in the living room and she had climbed up a chair onto the table, gotten down the box of Dunkin' Donuts Munchkins, which are the donut holes, and was sitting on the floor with them, covered with powdered sugar.
Mm-hmm.
And when she saw me, she held one up in victory and stood up to say, "Look what I did!"
Right. She was so happy, so proud of herself.
I'm so happy I grabbed the camera then. I got a picture of her doing that and a couple other pictures. And I gave those to our friend. And he was in charge of the thing, so he had them paint pictures of Alice, baby Alice, all over the top of the inside roof of the carousel.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the other artists complained and said they should not be white.
Mm-hmm.
So there are actually brown Alices and beige Alices and white Alices all over the top of the carousel. And if you look, you'll see the pose with one hand above her head, and the donut is not in her hand, just her hand is there. And the horse right below her has carved in its hoof A.H. for Alice Hill.
Well, that's a wonderful story, and Alice is still an adorable baby to this day.
She is. Dentzel hired other immigrant woodworkers from Europe and set up shop in 1867. Gustave died in 1909, so his son William took over. After William's death in 1928, one of his artisans, Daniel Muller, went on to design his own carousels, and the rest of the stock was sold to the Philadelphia Toboggan Company, who we've heard of on and off throughout the series. Among William's carousels are King Arthur Carousel at Disneyland and the Merry-Go-Round at Knott's Berry Farm. Before it was King Arthur Carousel, it was at Sunnydale Park from 1922 to 1954. Prince Charming Regal Carousel at Walt Disney World was built by Philadelphia Toboggan Company in 1918. It was the Liberty Carousel at Belle Isle Park in Detroit, Michigan. Philadelphia Toboggan Coasters, as it is called now, is still in business and has been since 1904. Prince Charming is their 46th carousel. They also have carousels at Hershey Park, Santa Monica Pier in California, and Canada's Wonderland. They also built the Giant Dipper at Belmont Park in 1925, which I've been on, and the Giant Dipper at Santa Cruz Beach Boardwalk. Also, the Beast at Kings Island and the Anaconda in France.
Now, the Beast has a wonderful reputation amongst coaster enthusiasts. Many consider it one of the best coasters ever made.
Exactly. But we'll talk more about roller coasters, Russian ice hills, and scenic railways next time on the Pink Monorail podcast series, Manufacturing the Magic.
Well, that was a great entry, Shelley. Now, if they want to support this podcast, where can they go to do that?
They can go to patreon.com/fab, F-A-B.
Now, we'd like to say thanks to our new patrons, Roger and John. Thank you for your support. And of course, if you want to help us out, go ahead and visit us on Patreon as well. Now, if people want to find out more about your writing, about your Disney history, where can they go?
They can go to micechat.com, the happiest place in cyberspace, and jimhillmedia.com.
If people want to find more of my work, I usually write mostly on video games, sometimes comic books and Disney things, and you can find me on the Street Writer podcast. So if you just do a Google search for Street Writer, W-R-I-T-E-R, podcast, my page should come up, as well as a couple of videos on YouTube. If you listen to the most recent episode of I Want That Too on the Jim Hill Network, I talk a little bit about my Oswald collection. So if you're interested, check that out as well. A special shout out to our sponsor, Circa 1955. Nicole is the founder of Luxillume, a small company that makes candles, wax melts, and room sprays. She creates scents that capture the season, nature, or wonderful memories. She also takes commissions for larger orders, such as weddings or company gifts. It turns out that Nicole is also a huge Disney fan and has a line called Circa 1955. She creates scents inspired by all things Disney. This includes the parks, attractions, treats, and films. She creates each formula and batch of candles herself. For every one scent she's released, she has probably made over 200 trials just to get the smell right. Don't take my word for it. Go to circa1955.com, order a candle, and use promo code PINK15. That's PINK15 to get 15% off your purchase. Support a small company that also gives back to the community. You're going to love it. Another shout out to Jim Hill for hosting Pink Monorail on his podcast network. The Jim Hill Podcast Network also includes Looking at Lucasfilm, The Disney Dish, I Want That, and Fine Tuning. Thanks for listening, and be sure to like, subscribe, and leave a review for each podcast. Have a great day.